first domestic variant we see. Newsnight understands that Public Health England and NervTag have been investigating several new mutations across the country. One is based in Liverpool, where I've been told there have been some 48 cases of a new mutation which contain the E484K mutation, common to the Brazil and South African variants, and which seem to make vaccines less effective. And crucially, it's happened here, not been imported. Public Health England tells us we are currently investigating a cluster of cases in Liverpool of COVID-19. All cases are linked and further genome testing and public health investigations are underway. There's no reason to believe that these new clusters pose any serious threat right now, but it is indicative to the cat and mouse game we now face.
Yeah, I would say 2021 is the year of the variant in vaccines. Especially the mRNA vaccine manufacturers have said within weeks they can change their vaccines. So then it becomes a race of how quickly can we redesign the vaccines, roll them out and get them into people's arms faster than, let's say, a new variant could spread. And so I don't see any way around in the coming year or two having travel restrictions in place, because that's one of the few ways to protect against variants coming in once we deal with the domestic issue of getting the numbers low.
The next year or two to have travel restrictions?
Well, there's no easy way out of this crisis, if I'm completely honest. I mean, this is a global problem. So even if we suppress it here effectively and vaccinate everyone, it could be circulating somewhere else in the world. And all it takes is for someone to get on a plane ride and come here. And if we have everything open and for it to spread.
Permanent travel restrictions will not sit comfortably with the Tory benches, and nor will the prospect of a much lengthier wait for lifting of restrictions than they feared.
Being realistic, it seems to me unlikely that we'll be looking at relaxing restrictions in any kind of serious sense before the end of March. And then from that point, it's going to then have to be very, very gradual. Vaccination will start to play a role, but it's going to have to be a gradual easing out of those restrictions. Otherwise, if we pull the plug, as it were, we'll get a resurgence and we'll have to be reintroducing measures again.
That extends even to the most basic lifting, that of schools. I'm told that a preliminary estimate discussed in government suggests that if schools return after February half-term, even if other restrictions remain in place, hospital numbers would remain at very high levels. More comprehensive work modelling the question of schools is to be undertaken in the next week or so, but it is certain that hospital numbers are so high that there is very little room for manoeuvre.
I think, listening to this evening, the penny has now dropped with the government. They realise that there's no quick fix to this. There's no one-stop shop solution. It requires a lot of different things coming together and very steady progress, and not lifting things quickly and making the mistakes that we made before.
It's been the view that vaccines are the silver bullet, and they do remain the way out. But tonight that silver may be a little less lustrous, a realisation that things may take a little longer and be a little harder than we'd hoped.
Lewis Goodall were joined by Roxana Faiyaz, the Labour Mayor of Newnham in London, Sir Geoffrey Clifton-Brown, Treasurer of the 1922 Committee of Backbench Tory MPs and the most senior Conservative on the Public Accounts Committee, and Professor John Edmonds, who is a member of SAGE but is appearing tonight in a personal capacity. We asked the government to take part, but they declined. Sir Geoffrey, whether or not these figures on mortality are true, as you said, it's a spread, and that's exactly what John Edmonds said. We know the transmissibility is much greater. So therefore, doesn't it make it more imperative, if we know that only 17% of people who should be isolating are self-isolating, is it not imperative now that we get more help to them to allow them to self-isolate, that they are given the £500 that so many have been denied?
Well, I entirely agree with you that those people who have been either in contact with somebody who's had the disease or have tested positive, it's a very important aspect that they do self-isolate. I think the problem with giving everybody more money is that some people will abuse that and deliberately try and obtain the £500. Having said that, I think what we need to do is make the message very clear that people need to self-isolate, that they will be checked up on if they test positive, and that the rules must be obeyed.
Well, let me bring in Roxana Faiyaz here. Now, you hear that actually what Sir Geoffrey is saying, that people have to self-isolate whether or not it's financially difficult for them. And I know in Newnham, in London, you've got one of the highest rates in any borough in London. Why?
Compared to the London average of £29,500. How are people expected to live, especially when they are exposed to the realities of insecure zero-hour contract work.
Yes, well, let me put that to Geoffrey, because we don't have much time. I do want to put two things to him. First, what Roxana was saying is have more faith in the British public.
What does the government expect for residents to be doing? They have to work, they have to live.
Thank you all very much indeed. Thank you. I'm afraid we've just run right out of time. Thanks. In which case, sorry, could I just clarify this? In which case, by bringing it out today without any of that kind of detail, frankly, is that not actually something that ends up scaring people? And if it does, is it because the government actually wants us to behave differently?
Well, even without an increase in mortality, this new variant is a very serious turn for the worst anyway. It's significant, and the evidence on its increased transmissibility is overwhelming. Well, I think it's true that these results are still quite preliminary. I think maybe I should explain what we've done and explain where the data come from. It comes from a very large data set where people have been matched, where the Pillar 2 testing, so that's the testing in the community, has been matched with the death data.
A bombshell. How worried should we be?
Well, I think it's true that these results are still quite preliminary. I think maybe I should explain what we've done and explain where the data come from. It comes from a very large data set where I'd like to look at other data sets to make sure that this pattern, to see whether this pattern is replicated in other data sets.
Would it have been better to wait until you had more certainty, till SAGE had more certainty, till NervTag had more certainty, till the government had more certainty? Or is there something that needs to be done now as a result of the preliminary evidence?
Well, as I say, this study is this data set is very large, and it's been looked at in some great detail by.
It's quite a big data set on this.
Well, good evening, Kirsty. As he said, he made it very clear that this is preliminary. There is still a lot of evidence gathering to be done. So whilst it's a big concern, I think we should proceed on the previous plan, which is to adhere to the rules strictly of the lockdown, but above all, proceed to getting people vaccinated as quickly as possible.
London local authorities, where the case rate has been really high, in the first week of January, our case rate was 1,200 cases per 100,000 population.
In conjunction with the new Brexit rules, particularly rules concerning touring productions and whether or not arts organisations, theatres can actually get visas to travel abroad, and yet this is all about soft power, we call the arts soft power. These visa restrictions, what further impact are they going to have on the future of theatre?
For theatre, I think it will be limited. For music, particularly classical music, but music generally, I think it's much, much more serious. For dance, it's really serious because those, once you step beyond language, obviously the international touring circuit opens up a great deal. I think it's going to be, it's absolutely a kind of triple whammy at the moment. And like you say, the performing arts, creative industries generally in this country are one of the areas, if not the foremost area, where we really can claim to be world beating.
Of talent.
Yes, yeah, there is, frankly. I think both in the craft areas that you're talking about, but also the artists themselves. I mean, most of the artists that work in the theatre or the performing arts are freelance, and the provision for freelancers has been, unfortunately, pretty lacking.
Thank you very much indeed, Rufus Norris.
Thank you.
Well, we're right out of time. That's all from us tonight. Have a good weekend. Goodbye.